Hey everyone, how are we today? I've got Rachel Posner on the podcast, and I'm so excited. I always say this at every podcast, like I'm so excited to talk, but like I literally am like, I love to pick brains. I love to like get all of the information. And so, first of all, thank you for being here. And Rachel is a yoga therapist and mindfulness coach. And so, if you just want to, if you're open to it, just sharing with the listeners, just kind of how you help your clients, what you do, and then we'll dive into some questions that I have.
Okay. First of all, I also am very happy to be here. And that's kind of a mixed bag question because how I help my clients looks different depending on the client. There's a lot of ways that I work with people, whether it's one on one, I guide retreats, I have yoga and mindfulness memberships, I teach online courses. There's lots of different ways that I work with people. But
Yeah.
I'd say there's sort of an umbrella thing that I'm doing, which is helping people to understand their stress response, helping people to understand their specific nervous system, how it works, why it throws us into fight, flight, or freeze sometimes, and why other times the same stressor doesn't do that.
Yeah.
People come to me for all different reasons. Oftentimes it starts with stress, but we could be working on anxiety, depression, trauma, grief, or simply how to pay more attention and enjoy our lives more.
Mhm.
So I know that's a sort of rambling answer, but but I do all of those things, and I do
Yeah.
them using yoga therapy and mindfulness is
Yeah.
kind of my primary perspective. But I'd say I'm generally looking at the intersection of neuroscience, psychology, and mindfulness. So, what actually happens in the brain when we work with these mindfulness practices?
I love this because I think at least old Erin used to think like, oh, this was the problem. But like at the end of the day, like I think we all want to feel calm and we want to feel peaceful and we want to feel present and we want to go at our own pace and we want to feel good in our bodies, right? Like we think we're searching and we want to like, get help in all of these areas. And like you're saying, like these are like the presenting, I don't even want to say problems or issues, right? But that's what we would describe them as. But like ultimately it's like we want to feel good in our bodies and like that piece is what I like think about.
Yeah. And I think when your nervous system is calm, when you feel pretty balanced throughout the day, the things that you thought were issues or problems turn out to not be issues or problems. So, what I love is that when you take a slightly deeper dive and you work at the level of your nervous system and the way you deal with the stressors in your lives, lots of those stressors turn out to not be as big of a deal as we thought. But when we're experiencing those stressors from a physical stress response, they can feel really overwhelming.
Yes, very much so. So let's talk about that. Like, can you dive in a little bit deeper about, you know, the stresses, the modern day stresses that a lot of us experience, and then what that actually like the impact and like you're saying, the science and like the actual impact that it has on our bodies. Like, how is it actually playing out?
Sure. So I like to talk about the difference between stressors and the stress response. So stressors are just the things that come at us all day, and we live in a stressful society, a stressful culture. Like there's that is not going to change.
Mhm.
We are going to have too many things thrown at us throughout the day. It's the nature of the rhythm and speed at which we live in these days.
Mhm.
But how we respond to those stressors is really a reflection of what's happening inside. So, one too many stressors from an already kind of stressed out place will throw us into the stress response. When our bodies feel, when our minds, and actually it's really a more unconscious experience. It's not necessarily something we think through in the moment. But when at this deeper level, our nervous system feels like we are threatened, like we're not safe, it turns on the fight flight response, which throws adrenaline and cortisol into the system, which raises our heartbeat, our blood pressure. It narrows our vision. It's basically preparing us to fight or run, literally.
Mhm. Yeah.
But we're usually not in a situation where we need to fight or run. So that means we're trying to handle a stressor from it's like an illogical place to handle a stressor. When we want to handle a challenge, we want to be calm and collected and in our parasympathetic nervous system, which is our relaxation response. That's where we do best when we handle stressors. But if we get too stressed out and then we wind up in that fight or flight response, we don't handle the stressor well. And that's when we get overwhelmed. We think it's a bigger problem than it is, but it's really just we're not in a physiological place to handle it well.
Yeah. The image that just came to me is like, when you try to like fit in jeans, which this may not resonate with some people, but like, when you fit in jeans and they're too tight and you're just like constantly at this, like, okay, sucking in, like, this feels terrible. Like, that is what is the image that came to me, is like when we're constantly under this stress response. And I think so many of us, I remember, oh gosh, it was when maybe back in 2017. So what, 7 years ago, when my husband was changing jobs, he had taken off some time because his mental health was, he was experiencing some things and he was going back to work. And I felt so stressed and I started having heart palpitations. And I went to the cardiologist, which I've never been. I was maybe like, what was I, 37? And she's like, what is your stress like? And I'm like, not that much. And I think for so many of us, we live in such intense stress that we haven't been out of it long enough to be like Erin now, looking back at Erin then, is like, holy smokes, like what your amount of stress that you were under. But we sometimes don't acknowledge it, or we don't even realize how much we are in that stress response. And so we think that that's just, air quotes, normal, right? Like we don't even question or like think that there is another way
Yeah,
to feel.
that's exactly right. Like, so some of that is because our stress response is very physical. So, for example, if you have a very tight hamstring and every time you do a forward fold, you can only, let's say your hands go to your knees when you do a forward fold. That becomes the norm. This is my
Hmm.
hamstring. This is normal. And if
Yep.
your hands always come to your knees, you will think this is exactly as it should be. And then one day your hands come a little lower and you think, huh, this is different. And actually, it kind of feels better. I don't feel the same level of tension when my fingers come a little lower now. So part of it is staying in that parasympathetic response long enough for your body to feel something new. So if I wake up and this happens often in our culture. We wake up, we're already stressed. We're already late. There's 7 things that we have to do before 9 o'clock. If I wake up and let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm already at a 4.
Mhm.
Then when the next 5 things happen that bring me to a 6, okay, I'm handling a 6. But then when the next thing happens, it brings me into fight or flight. Now I'm like at an 8 and I'm bonkers.
Yeah.
If I woke up at a 1 and I stayed at a 1 for a few hours, you start to get used to a different physiological feeling because the stress response is a physiological one. So we get used to however we feel, and we really
Mhm.
have to kind of feel something different for a while to reset so that we have better perspective on, oh, this is too much. There's something I need to do right now to settle myself down.
Yeah. Will you explain to the listeners, like, what is parasympathetic response? What is sympathetic response? Like, what actually is that? And like, because, people might hear this and think, oh, well, I'm like, your body is supposed to be stress. Like, stress is an okay thing for your body to feel, right?
Hmm.
In, I don't want to say correct instances, but like when you are driving and you are about to be hit, like you want that adrenaline, right? Like you want to be able to get out of the way, right? Or you're walking down the street and somebody's not paying attention, they almost hit you. Like those are the things you do want to run from. And most of the time we live in like, we get a bill in the mail and we are having all of this, stress response because of what we think about money or our business, or and so I think I would love it if you would share like parasympathetic and sympathetic response, and then like, yeah, our bodies are supposed to feel it. It's just how often are we feeling it? And
Yeah. Okay, so the nervous system is brilliant. I am a huge fan. I am in no way saying it stinks that we have to go into fight or flight. Fight or flight is a brilliant thing that saves our lives. And so the nervous system evolved to keep us alive, which means it's always vigilant. It's always on the lookout for threats. It's really, really good at looking for threats. And when it sees a threat that it perceives as dangerous, sometimes we move into that fight or flight response. In
Mhm.
an ideal world, you get a little boost of adrenaline or cortisol. Those help us to fight or flight. They give us more glucose, they narrow our vision, and they shunt a lot of energy into our big muscles. They're not preferencing reproduction and endocrine system and digestion. They're saying, like, those aren't emergency systems. We don't need those right now. So when too many threats come in, the nervous system basically decides for us, right? Because when that turns on, we don't have as much access to our executive thinking. Our prefrontal cortex is the part of our mind that says, the part of our brain that says, oh, actually, this isn't a problem. That is, for example, a stick, not a snake, right?
Mm.
So in an ideal world, we see the stick, we think for a second it's a snake, we get a little adrenaline and cortisol boost, we recognize that it's not what we thought, we calm right down.
Mm.
So that boost puts us into our sympathetic nervous system. That's the part of us, that's the system that gives us that adrenaline and cortisol rush.
Mhm.
And the parasympathetic is the calming end of the nervous system that says, all is well, settle down, everything's fine, turns on the immune system, the digestive system goes back on, and we're fine. So it's a great thing that we can turn those, we can move from one system to the other. We need that when we're in danger. The problem is that oftentimes we perceive danger where danger does not exist, right? So my nervous system can turn on because my daughter can't find her shoes and now I'm late, right? That is not a danger. It is stressful. I
Mhm.
do have to
Mhm.
take a few deep breaths and recognize I might have to call someone to say I'm going to be a couple minutes late. I'm not suggesting it's not stressful and it's not impactful in my life, but I am going to survive that.
Yeah.
So the issue is that we evolved to survive, not to thrive. And
Mm.
sometimes all of that surviving, all of that vigilance stops us from really thriving because we're on edge a lot looking for these threats.
Mm. Yes. So in terms of, because we live in a fast-paced society, like that is one of the things that I encourage, you know, clients and everyone that I come in contact with, right? Like we can unsubscribe to the hustle. We can pause, we can slow down like that. It's I think there's several things that come in, right? Like it doesn't feel safe to do that, right? When you're in that survival state, right? When you're in that stress response, it is to rush to get out of there, whatever it might be. And so you want to talk a little bit about like the power of the pause and slowing down and like how that is actually beneficial, because I think our brains want to be like, but I have so much to do, and it just like wants to go off on the train of like, but I don't have time, I can't do that, I can't stop all the things.
Yeah. Um, First of all, I just want to quote and say this very loudly: the unsubscribe to the hustle is maybe the best tagline I've heard so far. I don't know. I love that. Because I think it's true. We think we have to subscribe. It seems when we are in that like one too many things place, it seems like we have to. Like it's a
Mhm.
survival mechanism to always be hustling. And it's just not true.
Mhm.
And that can sound really condescending, and that's certainly not my intention. It's, you could say, well, it's not true for me. But I just know I've worked with too many people to think this is just a unique thing to me. You can unsubscribe. And part of how you unsubscribe is to take more short pauses. So yes, I'm a mindfulness teacher, and I think it's great to meditate 20 minutes a day. And I don't think that that's reasonable to ask of all of us for
Or to
lots,
start with, right? Like if you're like, for me,
certainly not
I
to
was
start
like
with.
0 to 20. What are you asking me to do? I was like
Uh-huh.
5 minutes. That's good enough,
Yeah.
But you start somewhere.
You start somewhere. And even if you are a regular meditator, even if you do find 20 minutes a day, I still think it's incredibly, I would say just as important to find short pauses throughout the day. Because 20 minutes a day, and it can be 10, I mean, research shows that 10 minutes a day of meditation can have significant impact on brain changes. um, specifically making that parasympathetic response stronger and the sympathetic response weaker. So just to backtrack for a second, anytime the brain is just like a muscle, right? You use the different networks of the brain, those network gets stronger. So when we strengthen the parasympathetic networks, we weaken the sympathetic networks. We're never going to weaken them so much that we're not going to be safe. Like that's an impossibility, right? So research shows that even 10 minutes a day of meditation will strengthen those parasympathetic networks. So it'll make us less vigilant, less overwhelmed. Okay, that aside, taking time throughout the day, like I love to say top of the hour. Usually when people who have jobs where there's a lot of meetings, those meetings often start at the top of the hour. So if you get off, even if you're back to back, if you give yourself 5 minutes, that's enough time to get a drink of water, go to the bathroom, and spend 2 minutes stretching or breathing. Even 2 minutes can reset your nervous system to some extent. So if you're feeling really stressed, don't take that stress into the next meeting. Give yourself a pause. So much of why we wind up in fight or flight is because we're not meeting our basic needs. So it seems like we are, right? I'm fine right now. But I could be having this conversation and be thirsty or have to go to the bathroom or hungry. And all of those things will signal the brain that I'm not safe. Your
Mm.
body is saying, we don't have enough glucose. We don't have enough water. Like these are the
Mm-hmm.
things that we need, the building blocks of survival. And so your body will signal your brain that you're not safe. And I could be sitting here in fight or flight having a lovely conversation and wondering, why am I feeling anxious?
Mm.
Feeling anxious, not because I'm scared about this conversation. I'm feeling anxious for something as simple as I'm thirsty. I'm
Mm.
holding too much tension in my low back because I've been sitting in this chair. This is my third meeting. It's not, but
Mm-hmm.
for example.
Yeah.
So just simply taking a pause and noticing those things can be a total game changer in your day.
Yeah. I actually just did that. I had gotten off a call and I was like, the call that I was previously on, it was with several, like 15 people, right? And I just was like, I could just feel in my body, right? That energy. I'm like, this just doesn't. And I was just asking myself, like, is this yours? Does this feel good? Like, what do you need? And I was like, I'm just going to go sit in the chair and just look out at the trees. And I watched the squirrels for a little bit. And just that, like you're saying, like that reset, like I think also too, we've been a culture that like it has to like go big or go home. It has to be these big things, right? Like it literally can be like, I'm going to just sit with no distractions and just, and in the beginning, right? If you're learning this, like that feels really weird and awkward, right? Because we always have our phones with us. We're always doing something, right? So, like you're saying with the brain, like building up this muscle of sitting by ourselves for a little bit, like being bored. Like I wrote down, like, why are we booking back to back? Like, you know, this is something else. It's like sometimes some of this practice is like asking yourself questions like, why are you even doing that? Like, where are you? You know, we pick up like belief systems from all around us, like why don't you value yourself to give yourself a 30-minute break in between meetings, right? um and this isn't a place where we start to shame ourselves, but it's just kind of a curiosity, like, yeah, I would like to go pee, I would like to refill my tea, I would like to, like, you know, maybe go walk around the block, move my body a bit, come back, be rejuvenated. And that's the thing too, it's like it's not that one way is wrong and the other way is right. It's just that one feels better in your body, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it feels good in your body to be hydrated. It feels good in your body to eat nice, nutritious things that your body loves. It feels good to take a break in between meetings and to kind of just recenter yourself. Um,
Yeah.
and so I also wrote down, like, you know, you said some people might be like, well, it's, I'm paraphrasing. You said something about like, we're not in stress or it's not true or something. And if you are listening and and that resonates with you, it's like, notice where we want to argue, right? Like sometimes I think sometimes we want to keep some of those beliefs. We want to keep those limitations that we're putting on ourselves versus like, what if I lived in a place where everything wasn't survival? What if I lived with a slower pace? What, and so just spending some time to question, um, and get curious about, like, do I actually want to keep this way of believing or feeling or acting, or living, um,
Yeah.
versus being so quick to be like, that's not true, or, because that's how I used to be like, it's like, well, that's my favorite was like, must be nice for you, and it's like,
Exactly. I mean, I think a big thing to remember, and this helps me bring a lot of compassion to noticing those sort of defenses in myself, is that your brain loves the familiar.
mm,
That's what it wants. Like,
mm,
we have created all of these neural pathways, all of these patterns that allow us to just default to
mm,
old ways of being.
yeah,
And it's because that's where we feel most safe.
yeah,
Anytime you do something new, there's a risk, right? And the risk can be low, but it still feels like a risk. Your brain, again, is always defaulting to what's safest and what's most familiar. So oftentimes the things that we do that are not necessarily serving us, we don't we do them because we're in default mode. That's just the way we do it, which is what I love about mindfulness. Mindfulness is starting to notice those patterns. It's starting to ask myself, what would it be like to have a half hour between meetings? How would that feel? What would the impact be? What would it mean if I had one less meeting a day? Like, let's
mm,
be honest. Does that mean that I'm going to get fired? Or if I really take some time to look at it, it actually is not that impactful. It's just that I assumed it was because that's my habit and I do what makes me feel safe. Our primary thing is staying alive, and wellness is secondary. So I think part of it is asking ourselves the question, like, do I want wellness to always be secondary? Because if the answer is no, there's a lot more effort involved because of these neural pathways that just say, do this because you've always done it that way. So it takes work, but it's not necessarily work that's a struggle. It's work that's really
and
rewarding.
familiar, right? It's I think in the beginning, I think it takes more effort. I think of it like a plane, right? Like when the plane takes off, how much fuel does it use to go down the runway and to take off, and how much does it use once it's, up in the air? And not that while you have developed these practices or habits, these newer habits, that it's just so effortless, right? But I feel like it does become easier. It's like that getting started, that shifting from where we are to, or where we used to be or where we don't want to be to where we're going, does take a little bit more effort, right? Like, and the value, the that you receive, the feelings and how you feel in your body because of that, like, for me, and I think it's just so worth it.
Yeah, I agree.
So in terms of when you talk about like your, we talked about, like, before the podcast we were talking about like top down, bottom up, and I would love for you to share, because I know I used to live, when I think about top down, that's how I live my life. Like, I would always say, like, living in our heads and not in our bodies. And
Hmm.
so how, like, explain that, and like, what does that look like for us?
So, top down practices are practices that are a little more reflective. We're thinking through something, and that's valuable, right? A little bit of what we were just talking about. It's valuable for me to think about my day, it's valuable
Hmm.
for me to reflect and consider what might be different. But when we're pretty stressed, top down is difficult because,
Mm,
again, when you're stressed, your vision is narrow, you're not very calm, and you don't have a wide perspective. So the answers to those reflections will often be more narrow than if you were reflecting from a relaxed state. So I always say top down is really important, but make sure you're doing it when you are settled, grounded, and
mm,
feeling like you're in your body.
mm,
And the way to do that is a bottom up practice. So I would say I almost always, unless, surprise, surprise, I'm feeling outrageously relaxed from the get go, I'm always starting with my clients and with myself with a bottom up practice, which is something like, what does it feel like to take a 4-second inhale and a 6-second exhale? Can
mm,
you feel your kind of belly, low back, low sides, expand a bit below the ribs as you inhale. That tells you that you're using a diaphragmatic breath, which turns on that parasympathetic rest digest response. And can you exhale a little bit longer because the exhale connects us to, again, that rest and digest response. There are 1,000 bottom up practices, but they are all body centered practices. So it could, even if you're using your mind, it could be noticing how you're breathing, noticing sensations in your body, noticing where you might be holding tension. These are the kinds of practices that help to reset the nervous system so that then we can do some reflective top down practices and use our prefrontal cortex, our executive thinking functions to make good decisions for ourselves. But to start from the top is often really getting just like a little piece of the pie because we're not in our bodies yet. So most of us, I love to use this image as a triangle. So if you visualize a triangle that's upside down, the point is at our feet. Usually we're
Mm-hmm.
walking around like an upside down triangle. The most attention, the most energy, the most activity is happening around our head, and we're barely aware of what's happening below the shoulders.
Mm.
In an ideal world, we want to be a right side up triangle. We want a wide base. We want, if you think about just in terms of proportionality, we
Yeah.
want our energy, our activity, our awareness to be proportional to that triangle. So the majority of our attention or our awareness is in the body. And when we stay in that right side up triangle, that's like an image of a parasympathetic nervous system.
Mm.
It's one that's grounded. We don't feel super scattered. We're not brain foggy. Oftentimes when we're upside down, just because there's a lot more going on in our heads doesn't mean it's really serving us, right?
Yeah.
Because when there's too much activity in our heads, oftentimes we have brain fog, we're feeling scattered, we're doing 10 too many things. Um, when we're in that right side up triangle, we're often much more productive. So it's not like I'm just walking around stretching all day. Like I'm using my brain. But my mind is a lot more productive and effective when I'm in my body too.
That you said this, and I've always used it like, flipping our lid. Like, think about it. If you have a argument or a disagreement with your spouse, and you want to, your emotions are heightened, you're feeling anger, you're feeling frustration, and then you're actually trying to have a conversation, the lid is flipped, right? Our prefrontal cortex is offline because we're in such a heightened state. And how many of us have been told or taught, like, let's talk about it, let's, and it's like, first we just need to feel, right, what we're feeling, and allow ourselves to come back down to that parasympathetic state, right? Of like, okay, now I'm ready to actually talk about it, versus saying things from an emotional heightened, that's when we say things we are like, I wish oh, I would have just felt for a little bit longer, right? Like, I don't want to say we regret, but it's like, oh man, that was kind of like coming from the emotional part, right? Versus, like you're saying, the calm, the clear, not the brain fog, the heightened sense.
Right. Yeah, because when we say those things that we regret, we meant them, but we meant them because we were only accessing a very small part of ourselves.
Mm, mhm.
And so it's not that they weren't true or that they didn't need to be said, but if we were accessing the fullness of ourselves, there would be a lot more to say. That one thing that we said that was hurtful is not the only truth. So I think oftentimes it's not necessarily that we want to take back all the things we said when we're in that fight or flight response, but we want to tell a bigger truth. And that was only a tiny piece of the truth.
And I think also from a place of compassion, right? Like, I can say what I'm feeling from a place of compassion versus saying it from a place of anger. And it's got that little,
Yeah.
sharp tongue or sharp, versus the the message is still the same. It's just like the energy that it comes from. Is it coming from love and compassion and like, hey, it really did hurt my feelings, or you're an asshole and you hurt my feelings, right? Like,
Right.
what is it layered and laced with?
But the hurt your feelings is the important part because
Yes.
the reason that it comes with that edge is because when we're in fight or flight, we are afraid,
Mm.
right? So what do we do when we're afraid? We protect. We
Mhm.
try to make more space between
Mhm.
ourselves and the person that we're in this conflict with. And it doesn't mean that we're afraid of a physical altercation. We're afraid that we won't be loved. We're afraid that we're not being seen. It's like those deeper things that we're really afraid of. And when we're afraid, we get protective. And when we get protective, we either fight or flee, or we freeze. So the
Mm.
other piece that I didn't talk about yet is that, your nervous system is set up to help you take care of the situation. So if you feel like you're in threat, your first goal is to get out of there, to flee.
Mhm.
If
Mhm.
you cannot flee, and you can imagine this in a physical altercation, if you can't flee, then you fight, you defend
Yeah.
yourself.
Yep.
And if that's not working, that is extremely terrifying. So if that's not working, we freeze. We basically shut down, collapse, and that helps us to kind of dissociate or check out of the situation. But if let's just say you're just in a normal conflict with someone you love, right? If you're feeling afraid, you're feeling fearful, you get protective, you also go through those motions. You might start by trying to like leave. I just want to get out of here. I don't want to deal with it. But then there's more conflict. Now we start to fight. Now there's more conflict still. Nothing's working that we're saying. Now we start to shut down. Like you
Mm.
can see kind of we each have
Mhm.
our own go-tos. And while that is sort of the order that things work, we create our own patterns and habits. So if my experience has have been largely that nothing worked, so I froze, then I move through that flee and then fight super fast and dive right into freeze. So I say
Mm.
that because if you're listening and you're wondering, when you describe that order, I feel like I spend more time in freeze. I don't even notice fight or flight. It's
Yep.
just because freeze has been the most effective for you in past experiences. So now you have a habit of getting there really quick, more quickly than your kind of executive functioning can really track. Your nervous system works really fast.
I love that you said that because there were things when I learned about this, there were certain situations that I would fight, and then there were certain situations that I would freeze more on, and this is always so, when I learned this, it's like, when you hear about, people that have experienced certain traumas, and the freeze part, like I don't know if we talk enough about that, because people are like, well, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you? It's like, because like you just said, right? Like you had already been through the others, and maybe that was just like, now that was like the complete shutdown, right? It's almost like when your brain is it true to, or correct to say, like you're just a disassociating, just to like, it's like what your body does, like you just said, like to protect itself, and so
Yeah. Yeah. Freeze is a kind of highly protective system, and it's kind of a miracle, right? If you have experienced a more severe trauma, and you don't remember it, this is like a beautiful system. Your body's saying you do not have to endure this
mm,
consciously.
mm,
But sometimes we get kind of good at freezing when we don't
mm,
really need to freeze. So in a more severe trauma, and let's just take something like a car accident, right? There
yeah,
could be a lot of physical pain, not just emotional fear.
yeah,
It's a good thing that our body allows us to freeze. But when we veer towards that, again, when the threat is not really the kind of threat we're perceiving, when we're in our minds sort of exaggerating that threat, when we're perceiving it as worse than it is, then we can tend to get to sort of habitually check out. So there's a big spectrum of freeze that moves all the way from kind of numbing out, maybe I'm just binging on Netflix all day long, or emotional eating. There's lots of ways that we sort of numb out in our daily life. It can
hmm,
move all the way into dissociation. I can't feel what's happening in my body, all the way into collapse, where my blood pressure really drops low and I'm unaware of my surroundings. So there is a big spectrum that we can experience. And you're right, based on past experiences, your brain is always assessing the situation. So if you are in a stressful situation that feels familiar and in the
mm,
past, or your brain recognizes it as, I think this kind of seems like that, it may kind of fast track you to
mm,
freeze because that's what worked best last time, or
mm,
fast track you to fight because that's what worked last time. So we store information There's like a little tagline: neurons that fire together wire together, meaning
Mm-hmm.
familiar situations get stored in the brain in the same areas so that the brain can recall them quickly. Again, more quickly than we can think about using our executive functioning. That's all happening kind of beneath the surface.
I
Um,
I love how, like, when you really think about it, like, our bodies are just so amazing,
right.
like, so many of us. I used to be this person, right? Like, talk down to it, not appreciate it, but it's like it's always trying to keep us safe. It's always there for us, doing the best that it can, in the ways that it knows how to. And so
Yeah.
it's like, I'm teary. I'm just like, oh, so much gratitude for our bodies, like, so much gratitude.
Yeah. I mean, that's the key to all of it, is to bring in a tone of warmth and compassion. Because what you said, I just want to like repeat it, that sometimes when we freeze, or if we've been in a traumatic situation and we question how we responded,
Hmm.
I want to just keep bringing people as much understanding of: one, your body did what it thought was going to be best for you.
Yep.
And two, the more we can bring in a sense of warmth and gratitude versus shame, resentment,
Mhm.
questioning, uh, the more we come into that relaxation response. So compassion turns on the parasympathetic response. Compassion networks are in our prefrontal cortex. When we're accessing those networks, we feel a sense of calm. When
Mm.
we are accessing the network of resentment and shame, we bring in a sense of dysregulation, that sympathetic response. Again, this is not like a shame on you for feeling shame. It's
No,
I think
no.
it's really helpful to know the more self-compassion we can bring to ourselves, the calmer we will stay and the better we'll deal with those stressors. So even the simplicity of noticing after a meeting, and I'm reflecting on how this conversation went. Am I going to reflect later and say, Rachel, you're an idiot. I can't believe that's how you
Mm.
described XYZ? Or am I going to say, oh, I actually could have probably done a better job of articulating that. I'll remember that for next time, but no big deal. Like there's such a difference in how I'm reflecting and reviewing. Same thing. In both
Yep.
situations, I am giving myself some criticism, but one is with warmth and one is not. And that difference is, it's sort of like a next level difference in terms of how
Mhm.
we build our own sense of self-compassion and wellness.
It's like game changer. I mean, I wrote down, like, curiosity, right? Like, when we become curious, we can we can we can evolve and we can improve, and it can come from love and compassion and grace. It doesn't have to come from shame and beat up and, you know, negative self-talk. And so many of us, right? Like, that's how we were raised, or that's how we were taught to do it, right? And so it makes total sense that we would. And here we go back to, there is no right or wrong. It's just in your body. It feels softer. It feels more loving. It feels like a little warm hug, when you're coming from that place of curiosity, like, okay, well, if I did want to improve, or like, okay, what would that look like, versus, like you're saying, just the it's like an expansion versus this, like, hiding contraction. um can you share a little bit about, because we're talking about sensing and, like, noticing with our bodies, like, interoception, and, like, what that is, and how that, yeah, what that is. And
So really simple, interoception is the skill of noticing sensations in your body. So proprioception is noticing where your body is in space. Interoception is noticing the sensation. So even as you're listening, can can you just drop into your feet? Maybe they're in contact with something, maybe they're not. Do you feel anything? And the answer might be no, right? It's harder to feel sensations that are neutral. When we have really pleasant sensations, those are easier to notice. Really unpleasant sensations, very easy to notice. Neutral, not so easy. But
Mhm.
we do have access to noticing even neutral sensations. So you could even just rub your hands together and notice, what does that feel like? The
Mm.
more we spend time actually paying attention, noticing those sensations, I mean, there's a host of wonderful repercussions. One is when you notice sensations in your body, you build a mind body connection. You build that sort of tendency to actually notice what's happening. And when you do that, you're more likely to pay attention to those basic needs, right? If I don't pay much attention to my body, I'm less likely to notice that I'm dehydrated until I'm dehydrated. I'm less likely to notice I'm hungry until I'm hypoglycemic, having low blood sugar, right? So there's just the very basics. Like, it is not always easy to notice when we're hungry until we're really hungry.
Yeah.
So practicing even noticing what it feels like to touch my fingers together will help me also notice hunger, right? Because any interoceptive skill is going to help with the overall, not just help me notice my fingers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one piece of it. And it builds that mind body connection, helps us care for ourselves. But it also strengthens your insula, which is the part of your brain that is also kind of in that mind body connection space. The insula is where we build a sense of connection. It's where we build agency. So it seems disconnected, but when we are aware of our body, when we have a relationship with our body, when we're comfortable noticing our body and how it feels, we build a sense of power, of self-control, of agency. So that has a huge emotional repercussions. It helps us with emotional regulation. So just again, when we notice sensations in our body, it also helps us to notice our emotions before they kind of get away from us to some extent. Like, I want to notice when I'm feeling sad or afraid before that sadness or fear turns into rage, right? If I can notice, I'm not suggesting anger is always a secondary emotion, but usually it is. Usually it's coming out of my not acknowledging my sadness, my hurt, my grief. So paying attention to sensations in your body helps you to do that. And it also helps with empathy. So just to reconnect the compassion part, empathy is kind of noticing what we're experiencing or noticing someone else's experience. This is a great thing for understanding overall what someone else is experiencing, but we don't want to stay in empathy. We want to move from empathy to compassion. So interoception helps us build that sort of understanding of what someone else is experiencing, and then we want to mindfully take that understanding and move it into compassion. Difference is, in empathy, if you're sad, I'm feeling your sadness. That's not helping you. You are not going to feel better because I feel your sadness. You are actually going to feel worse because now our nervous systems are co-regulating and we're both sad. You're going to feel best when you feel seen and understood, because I empathized for a moment. And then I moved to compassion, which is a deep desire to alleviate your suffering. Like, I just want you to feel better. And I feel deeply connected. I'm not actually experiencing your sadness.
Yeah.
So a lot of people who would refer to themselves as empaths, they can get stuck in the empathy route. And we feel like we're doing that from a place of love. Like, I want you to feel understood. But when we get stuck there, we usually turn on our sympathetic nervous system because we're becoming stressed by that some stress. So that's a little bit of a tangent, but it's how they can all sort of work together. You start with paying attention to sensations in your body. One of the things that happens is that we build that sort of empathy muscle. And from that empathy muscle, we transition to that warmth and compassion. And then everybody is supported, ourselves and the person that we're working with.
I love that, because I think it's valid to, obviously, like, we want to be seen, we want to be heard. And I think sometimes, like you're saying, we can want to connect on our struggles or where we're at, and it just keeps us in this cycle, versus seeing someone, validating someone, and also like so much love and compassion and grace. And like, once it's been seen, once it's been felt, now how do we want to, change it, or what actions do we want to take, versus staying in this consistent circle. And you said something about the co-regulation. I'd love for you to talk about that, because I think that also, right, comes into play. Like, we this is my belief, it's like, we can't really help other people unless, like, our bodies, we are regulated. And not that we have to be regulated all the time, right? But like, just how if we're always in these lower vibration emotions, it's hard to help others when we are there on a consistent basis.
Hmm. Okay, I love the topic of co-regulation. I really wish I understood this when I had babies, when my kids are teenagers.
Yeah. Mm,
Not that it's not still helpful, but
yeah.
the baby reference is really easy to describe. So your nervous system is incredibly intuitive, and it's picking up on your gestures, your tone of voice. It's picking up largely on non-verbal cues.
Mhm,
So if you are stressed, my nervous system will notice things like how you're holding your shoulders.
mhm,
It will pick up on your breath pattern. All these things that I'm not consciously noticing. Okay. But our nervous systems are always feeling the nervous systems of people around us. So it's why sometimes you can feel a little crazy when you are feeling really uncomfortable around a person and they're not saying anything wrong, but you always feel tense when you're in the room with someone else. It may be that they are just super stressed, but they cover it. They don't talk about it, they say they're fine, but you are always picking up on the tension that they're holding in their body. And our nervous systems are always sort of co-regulating. So we have to work really hard to stay calm when we're around people that are dysregulated. It's not that
mhm.
we can't do it, but it takes a lot of conscious
Effort.
intention and
It's
a
more
lot of
effort.
effort to stay relaxed in a room full of not relaxed or dysregulated people. And vice versa. When other people are regulated and we are not, it's easier for us to become regulated. So you just think about the image of holding a baby. Like that baby can't be calmed. You keep getting more stressed as a result because they're crying. Even if you're saying, it's okay, and like trying to keep it, that baby feels and hears the edge in your voice.
Mhm.
And so the more stressed you are, the harder it is to calm a baby. So that's like a very easy example that I'm sure
Mhm.
we've all like held a crying baby and had that experience, most of us. But it's happening all day with all the people around us.
That is such a beautiful example, and like you said, like, "Oh, man, I wish I knew that," and, like, I used to shame myself so much, and now it's like, "Oh, you just were doing the best that you could with what you had and what you knew," like,
Yeah.
"Oh, sweet Erin." So for those of us that are like, "Okay, well, but how do I co-regulate? How do I" like, what would you suggest are some first baby steps that we can start doing to be able to do that?
I mean, the absolute simplest thing is breathing. And I just want to say that I know that breathing is can be really hard, especially if you're feeling really anxious. So if you're
Mm.
feeling really anxious and your breath is really shallow and somebody tells you to take a diaphragmatic breath with a long exhale, you might want to strangle them, and rightfully so. So I'm going to give you a few different kind of directions. I'm starting with breath, but I just want to say that caveat first. I know some people who are listening are
How
like,
that
oh,
would have
killer. Everybody tells me to take a deep breath. But I'll just say a little bit more about what I mean by a deep breath. If you're feeling like you're struggling to take, let's say, a 3-second breath, don't push it. So think about
Mm.
breathing in the same way that you would think about a stretch. I'm not waking up in the morning and first thing in the morning doing the forward bend and touching the floor. That would not be good for my hamstrings or my back. I'm waking up and being more gentle, right? And then throughout the day, maybe eventually I'm a little warmer. Maybe I go for the floor at some point. Same thing with breathing. So think about the inhale as just trying to get more relaxed. You could put a hand on your low belly around your belly button and see if you can press your hand away. So anything that helps you drop your diaphragm down would expand at the belly. So it's not like your belly is filling up, but the muscle of your diaphragm is pressing down, and that makes your belly seem like it's getting bigger. What's actually happening is as your diaphragm presses down on an inhale, it creates more space in your chest cavity so the lungs can expand as you bring in more oxygen, and it kind of smushes your belly. That's why the belly should get bigger on an inhale. And then as you exhale, the diaphragm floats back up, it unsmushes your belly, and it compresses the chest cavity to help get the carbon dioxide out. When we take a diaphragmatic breath, a lot of things happen. We turn on that parasympathetic response. We stop overusing our shoulders, these muscles, the pecs, the scalenes. When we're taking a shallow breath, we're using those muscles. those
Mm.
muscles then get super tight. So all of that neck tension and shoulder tension is sometimes just coming from shallow breathing because we're really not meant to use those muscles to breathe unless we're in fight or flight. In fight or
Mm.
flight, yeah, we take a shallow breath. Like we're running, we're not taking a diaphragmatic breath in fight or flight, although that can be a way to help us get out of it when we're not in danger. So lots of benefits to that diaphragmatic breath. And then a longer exhale, again, releases more neurochemicals that turn on that parasympathetic response. So you don't have to there's a million different kinds of breathing techniques,
Yeah.
box breathing, like if you haven't worked with breath much, just start with the simplicity of, could I take a breath where I feel a little expanse around the belly? Eventually it'll get bigger and easier, and a longer exhale. 2 minutes of breathing like that can help to reset your nervous system. So that's a place I start. But then I just
Okay.
want to say, for the people that go, I just don't tell me to breathe. um, just try to hold your attention on something that is calming to you. That could be noticing the sensations in your body. It could be looking outside at the squirrels in the trees, like you did before our meeting.
Mhm.
It could be bringing in an image of yourself in a place in nature that's calming. The idea here is, can you hold your attention on something that feels reasonable, that is not about the stress, that is not about anything that's happening in your day, just a present moment experience of something that feels calming. And ideally, couple that with your breath. So the relaxation response is most easily turned on by a focus of attention and breathing. So if you're doing the breathing, just focus on your breathing. It's like a twofer. And if that is hard to really pay attention to,
Mm.
do your best with the breath, but pay attention to something else that's happening in the moment that is calming. It could be the simplicity of feeling your feet on the ground. What does it feel like to feel the support of the ground or the support of this chair beneath me?
Yeah. I love all of that. And like with our breath, it's like what I love about our breath is it's always there wherever we go, right? Like in any moment, we can just stop and check in with it and like notice what does it feel like? Is it shallow? Is it, and it's just like one of those things of just, here we go back to slowing down, right? And like really tuning in to like, what is our breath doing? And you were saying, and if you don't want to breathe, I would challenge each of you, if you're, your mind wants to argue with like, don't tell me about my breath, I would challenge like, why, why not look at, um, our breath. And the other thing is like noticing around, like, how does your sweatshirt feel on your body, like just like you're saying, just what are the little things that you can draw attention to that away from the mind chatter and the constant banter that's going on inside our minds, of like looking around and like, okay, I'm sitting in this chair in this moment, like that's where I had to start, like I'm sitting in this chair in this moment I am okay right now. Okay, that is the hallway out there, that is the window, like just naming things so that I could, you know
Hmm.
breathe and calm down a little bit.
Yeah. And everything that you're naming is present moment. So, the definition of mindfulness is paying attention to the present moment without judgment. That's it. It's that simple. There are a million different practices we can play
Mm-hmm.
around with, but that's exactly right. Can I just notice what's happening right now in some small way, whether it's my breathing, whether it's what it feels like in the sweatshirt, use your senses.
Mm-hmm.
Because generally all the things that we are worried about are happening in the future or
Mm.
happened in the past.
Yep.
The vast majority of our stressors. I am not suggesting that we don't need to think about the future and the past, but it's largely what we are doing instead of actually being in the present. And the present, sometimes it's scary, but most often it is less stressful than the past or the future events that you're thinking about. So if you can just give yourself a break from thinking
Mm.
about the past and the future by doing something very simple, like, this is another one that I often give people if they haven't had a lot of time spent in their body, and especially if you have a history of trauma, being in the body can feel very uncomfortable and unsafe.
Yeah.
So as you are working on that, as you are making your way back to your body, Sometimes the nicest thing you can do is notice the sounds in the room.
Mm.
And when you really pay attention to sounds, like what's the closest sound you can hear, what's the farthest sound you can hear, that's a really safe experience for many people because you're not asking yourself to really be in your body necessarily, but you
Mm.
are asking yourself to be really present. And nothing bad is happening in the present in that moment if you have the space to notice sound.
Mm. That's so good.
Yeah.
And I just want to, I mean, we've said it multiple times, but it's just like the value of slowing down, of noticing those things and getting more practice, right? It's not that Rachel is so, like born with this, it's just like the practice that you or anyone else has built up over time. We have just been more practiced in feeling stress, of rushing, of hurrying, of doing all of those things versus the practice of slowing down and paying attention and being mindful and, yeah,
Yeah.
having
Yeah.
compassion.
My natural tendency is definitely very cognitive. I am a natural thinker. So, yeah, I think that's important to recognize. Of course, I can talk about all this, and I have been practicing all of this for 30 years. So, I have a lot of experience and a lot to say about it, but it's not my natural inclination.
Yeah.
Maybe I could say now it feels like my natural inclination, but it's not my temperament.
Yeah. And also for each of you listening, of like noticing, because we want to compare, we want to look outside of ourselves, we want to, versus how was I yesterday? How am I today? Right? Like the the noticing of like, okay, today I'm going to do XYZ. I'm going to, intentionally breathe or pay attention to my breath or whatever. And just noticing the steps that I think sometimes, like in the self development world, we want to like, where are we going? Constantly focus on that. But like, look at how far you've come already. Like, look at how you've, changed the way that you used to be, or that you've noticed your breath more, or that you've slowed down, or that, just all of those little tiny nuggets along the way, of like giving yourself attaboys, attagirls, of like, yeah, I am making changes. I am, evolving, instead of so much of like, I haven't done all of this yet.
Yeah. I mean, that really makes me think about the whole sort of self improvement world, which I have like not an affinity for. I'm very repelled by the self improvement sort of constant.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I like what I want to say is you don't need to improve. You are
Yeah.
totally fine the way you are. And these are just practices that help us feel better throughout our day.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we just want to walk around feeling better and more self compassionate, and we want to feel more connected. And these practices help us to feel safer, more connected, and more compassionate. And it's much more about that than about being anybody different than you already are.
Yeah. It's like, there's no right or wrong, right? It just feels better. Just
Yeah.
feels better in the body. Oh, thank you, Rachel. Is there anything else that you want to share, or that I might have not asked or left out?
Well, I could tell you a little bit about the links that are going to be in the show notes if you want.
Yeah, of course. Yes. Share all
Um,
of that.
okay. My website basically just has everything I do. I have a page called the Everything page. You can
I
scroll
love
up,
it.
play around if you just want to see what I do and what I offer. Um, and there's also a link for a free practice. It's called Take Five. And so we talked about taking a pause. That's a taking a pause practice. It just gives you a minute with lots of guidance. There's just a number of prompts that help you to kind of settle and notice, and it gives you some practices that help relax your nervous system. And then there's also a link for a free trial for my yoga and meditation membership. So I have a virtual community that I work with. I teach 4 classes a week. And then there's like over 300 recordings in the library. So you can practice with me on Zoom or at your convenience. And yeah, you have links for all of those things.
That's so fun. I know someone else that does yoga virtually too, and it's just like such a, like, you get to do it in your own home, or you get to do it outside, or wherever you get to do it, and then you get to be with other people. So I'll put
Yeah.
I'll put all of Rachel's information in the show notes. And like I said, thank you again for sharing your time, your wisdom, and everything today.
My pleasure. It was lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.